Hey everyone, once again we're back with continuing education. I am Minister James Moss and we're in the book of Luke, chapter 6. We're going to cover verses 6 through 11, and this one is entitled Jesus Heals a Man's Hand on the Sabbath. All right, so this one, let me make sure I'm marked, because sometimes I'll end up going past the scripture that we're supposed to stop at. I've done that a few times, so I want to make sure that I don't go past where I need to go. And we're going to cover verses 6 through 11. The ongoing debate about the Sabbath would continue to escalate as Jesus continued with his mission, regardless of the day of the week. Obviously, Jesus taught and healed throughout the week, but the gospel writers present several incidents that occurred on the Sabbath in order to highlight the animosity of the religious leaders. This healing is the last in a series of 5 confrontations with the Pharisees in this section. The Pharisees had already objected to Jesus forgiving sins, associating with sinners, and challenging their traditions involving fasting and the Sabbath. All right, so here we go. This one's going to be fairly quick. All right, so here we go. And it came to pass also on another Sabbath that he entered into the synagogue and taught, and there was a man whose right hand was withered. And the scribes and Pharisees watched him whether he would heal on the Sabbath day, that they might find an accusation against him. But he knew their thoughts, and said to the man which had the withered hand, Rise up and stand forth in the midst. And he arose and stood forth. Then said Jesus unto them, I will ask you one thing. Is it lawful on the Sabbath days to do good or to do evil, to save life or to destroy it? And looking round about upon them all, he said unto the man, Stretch forth thy hand. And he did so, and his hand was restored whole as the other. And they were filled with madness and communed with one another what they might do to Jesus. Wow. Okay, and away we go. Verses 6 and 7. On another Sabbath day, Jesus was in the synagogue teaching. At this particular time, a man with a deformed right hand came into the synagogue. There seems to be no question that Jesus could heal the man. The Pharisees were concerned only to see whether Jesus would heal the man on the Sabbath. What difference should that make? Luke explains that they were eager to find some legal charge to bring against him. How unfortunate that they could not rejoice in a healing. Instead, they hoped to use the healing to bring a charge against Jesus. It was more important for them to protect their laws than to free a person from suffering. God's law prohibited work on the 7th day of the week. Thus, the religious leaders allowed no healing to be done on the Sabbath unless a person's life was in danger. Healing, they argued, was practicing medicine, and they had a law that a person could not practice this profession on the Sabbath. The man's condition was not life-threatening. Jesus could have avoided conflict by waiting until the next day to heal the man. But Jesus, as Lord of the Sabbath, had the authority to overrule the Pharisees' traditions and regulations. If he had waited another day, he would have been submitting to the Pharisees and showing that their made-up rules were indeed equal to God's law. But God's law for the Sabbath was never meant to keep people in bondage. When Jesus saw a need, he fulfilled it, regardless of the day or time. Again, verse 8, again, the text reveals the divine perception that Jesus retained while on earth. He knew their thoughts. Jesus would make a public display of this healing. So he said to the man with the deformed hand, Come and stand here where everyone can see. Jesus would make the important point that he could not and would not be bound by the Pharisees' burdensome laws. Verse 9, Jesus' question should have been obvious even to these religious leaders. Is it legal to do good deeds on the Sabbath, or is it a day for doing harm? The Pharisees' own laws allowed people to do good and to save life on the Sabbath. A farmer could rescue a sheep from a pit on that day, even though such an act would clearly be considered work. How absurd, then, to refuse to allow a person to do good to another person on the Sabbath. Verse 10, Jesus did not receive an answer to his question, so he turned his attention back to the man, telling him to reach out his hand. When the man did so, his hand became normal again, as with the leper and the paralyzed man Jesus gave this man a new life. So with the leper, the paralyzed man, and the man with the withered hand, Jesus gave them a new life. Verse 11, no particular action of Jesus is recorded. He told the man to move, and with that movement, healing arrived. Just I mean, Jesus did nothing that could be called work, but the Pharisees would not be swayed from their purpose. They became wild with rage. Jesus had looked them in the eyes and then had flouted their laws, overruled their authority, and exposed the hatred in their hearts to the entire crowd in the synagogue. When Jesus exposed their attitudes, he became their enemy, and they began to discuss what to do with him. Matthew and Mark state that their discussion focused on how they might kill Jesus. Ironically, their hatred combined with their zeal for the law was driving them to plot murder, an act that was clearly against the law. Mr. Law Keepers. All right, that does it for this particular video. Jesus heals a man's hand on the Sabbath, and it's all common sense to us, but these people wanted him done in so bad that it was like, at any cost, let's find out what we can do to be rid of him. And so even though a man's hand was healed and he was restored and he's able to become, a fruitful person in society, that didn't matter to them. They could care less whether he stayed crippled or not. They could care less whether the paralyzed man stayed crippled or not. They could care less whether the leper was healed or not. They would rather that he died. But Jesus was like, no, that's not going to happen on my watch. All right. And it shouldn't happen on our watch. All right. When we see that people are in need, whatever God allows us to do, helps or empowers us to do, we should do that with all joy, gladness, and just the happiness that a life has been touched and restored. Until next time, God bless you. God keep you. And remember to always continue to study.